Hello everyone and welcome to the Game Engine programming series where we write a game engine from scratch. Today we are going to finish everything that needs to be done in order to create and add script components to the game project. That includes further implementing the create game entity method in both the level editor and in the Engine DLL. And we are also going to do a couple of small improvements in the code at the end of the video. Now let's go back to the create game entity method. Remember, we didn't finish this because we didn't have a script component, but now we do, so we can continue implementing this. Okay, here we check if we have a script component, and we also check that the project has been loaded. So if the project hasn't been loaded yet, that means that we haven't loaded the game code DLL, so we can skip adding entities with script components, and we can do that later. So that's kind of deferred to whenever the game code DLL has been loaded. And then going back to the project class, here we need to also remove game entities with script components from the engine before we unload the DLL and then load them back whenever game code DLL is again loaded. So here we deactivate each entity that has a script component, which effectively removes it from the engine. And when we load the game code DLL again, we set this is active to true again. And I think this is all we have to do to actually add a script component to our game entity. So let's test if that works. Now we have this second game entity, for example, that I'm going to call a test entity. And then I'm going to try and add a script component of type kusalagubakup to it. And here we go. You have a game entity with this script component, and that's fantastic. Let's build the project. For some reason, it's trying to build it twice, so I need to figure out why that is. So this is where I made a mistake. Of course, when the build is done, we shouldn't try again, and this just doesn't account for that. It just tries 3 times anyway, and that's where it goes wrong. So I need to add this condition. So while the build is not done and we haven't tried 3 times, then we try again because apparently something failed here. And I made the same mistake here in is debugging. So if this part just returns a result, which could be true or false, then we should just return. And if that fails, so if it throws an exception, then we have to wait for a while. Maybe that's because Visual Studio was busy. So this part should go because we have to wait anyway. And I need to have another Boolean that I can use to determine if I have to try again. So in this case, while we haven't done this 3 times and try again is true, that means that this part threw an exception and we went to here, and then you skip over setting this try again to false. And that means that try again stays true, and then we obviously try again up to 3 times, and then we return. So this should fix the problem. So now we have this test entity here, and it has this script component, and I can now press build. And it will try and build it, but it was already done, so I can change something to make it rebuild. And there you go. Now something that I haven't done yet is making the bridge in the Engine DLL. So as you can see here, we only add transform components. So we did the C# part. Now we have this script creator function pointer that we can use to create a script, but the part in Engine DLL doesn't use it yet, so we have to do that as well. Here I'm going to add a script component like we did for transform components. Here we include the information that we get from the level editor about the script component, if there is any, in the game entity descriptor, and then pass it to the create function in game entity. If the script component in entity info is not null and also has a valid script creator function pointer, then it will create an instance of that type of script and then add it to the script component list. So now if I set a breakpoint in the script component in script CPP file, where we add or create a script, here for example, then we see that in the init info for this script component, we have a script creator that will create a script of type kusalagubaku. So that checks out. And when we close this application, we of course also need to unload the game DLL. It isn't strictly necessary, but it's good practice to do that. So yeah, I think now we are kind of done with this part of the code where we build and load scripts and add them to the engine. Here I can add a new script to this game entity, and then if I select 2 different entities that have different script components, then you can see that this name is gone because obviously they have different names. And if I select an entity without a script component and one with a script component, you don't see the script component here because we only show components that are common between selected entities. So that's nice. I think I'm going to correct these colors a bit because it isn't really what I meant. And I see my hotkey for building the project doesn't work, so probably there is something wrong with that command as well. So let's see if we can fix those things. Here I made a typo, it should be build command. And while I'm here, I would like to set the width of this half of the world editor, so it isn't quite this wide. So here I'll set a minimum width of this grid to 250 pixels. And I also need to set the width of this column definition to auto. That will fix the width of this part of the world editor. And in a game entity view, I would like to set this stack panel's vertical alignment to top. Now it's more pleasing to the eye. See what else. These colors of these labels should be lighter as well. And I also want to disable these controls whenever the game entity is disabled. So we can't change anything in disabled game entities. So first, to set the text colors, I just simply use the light text block style. And then to disable certain controls whenever the game entity is disabled, we can just bind the isEnabled properties of those controls. For example, I don't want to be able to add components to an entity that is disabled, so this toggle button should be disabled whenever the entity is disabled. However, the isEnabled property of the MS game entity is a nullable Boolean, whereas the isEnabled property of toggle button is a regular Boolean. And that means that when this isEnabled property is null, that we get a binding error and then things go wrong. So what we need to do is just to use a converter that converts a nullable Boolean to a regular Boolean. So here in game entity view, I'll just add a converter. Here, when this value is a Boolean, so it's not null, and the value of that Boolean is true, then we return true, and false otherwise. So if this value is false or null, then we return false. And that way we always get a regular Boolean value. And now we can use this converter to bind the properties. Now this toggle button is disabled whenever all the selected game entities are disabled. And I would like to do the same for this part, where we can change the name of the game entities. So this text box should also be disabled whenever all selected game entities are disabled, or at least some of them are disabled. And also the list of components should be disabled if the selected game entities are partially disabled. Now the text box for renaming the game entity and the list of components are disabled as well. So for example, here we have 2 components, and if I disable the game entity, all of those, including the drop-down menu for components, are disabled. Now, if we have a game entity that is enabled and we select one that's disabled, then these parts are disabled as well. And the hotkey for building the project works as well. At least it should have been working. Let's see what happened. So we are getting a null for parameter. And if we go to the world editor here and look at our key bindings, the one that I bound for build command, it doesn't use any command parameter like we did for the build button. So in this case, we need to set a command parameter as well. Otherwise, it will just pass null for command parameter and then our program will crash. And now if I press F7, then it will go ahead and build the project, as you can see here. So that's all I wanted to do for today. Now we can add script components to our game entities and add those entities in the game engine as well. So I hope you enjoyed watching this video, and I hope to see you next time. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please feel free to like and subscribe. If you join me on Patreon, you'll get access to the code on GitHub, so you don't have to type everything over from the video. Plus, there are also other nice goodies and rewards exclusive to my Patreon supporters. Please use the link in the video description to check them out. I hope to see you next time. Until then, take care and happy game engineering!